My name is Bethany. I am 32 years old and my chest was tightening in absolute agony. Sign the divorce papers and get out of this house. I should have known from the start you were nothing but a sick woman, my husband shouted. He tossed the cold legal document directly onto my sickbed. I was burning with a 104-degree fever. My vision blurred as my congenital heart defect flared up violently, making it almost impossible to breathe. I used to be a highly paid IT auditor, pouring every cent of my savings into funding his corporate career. Now, he was discarding me. Standing by the bedroom door with her arms crossed, my mother-in-law sneered at my struggle. "Know your place. Stop getting in the way of my son's future," she spat coldly. "He needs a wife who actually brings value to this family, not a medical burden." Before I could even process the ultimate betrayal, my husband grabbed my arm roughly. He dragged me down the hallway, completely ignoring my desperate gasps for air. He shoved me out the front door and threw my belongings onto the frost-covered lawn into the freezing Austin winter night. The heavy oak door slammed shut in my face, locking me out in the deadly cold. They thought they had permanently disposed of a useless problem. But they had no idea that just 5 months later, at a massive public event, he would freeze in absolute shock as his entire world collapsed. Welcome to Revenge Mode. If you enjoy gripping stories where toxic people face the ultimate consequences, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Grab a drink, settle in, and let's dive right into today's story. The night wind howled through my thin clothes. I stood barefoot on the frost-covered concrete of the driveway, clutching a few scattered garments I had managed to gather from the lawn. My body convulsed with violent shivers as the rare Austin winter freeze sank directly into my bones. Every breath felt like inhaling shards of glass. I forced myself into a heavy coat over my pajamas and began walking down the empty suburban street. I needed to reach the commercial intersection 2 blocks away to find warmth. My chest burned with a terrifying familiar pressure, but I forced my legs to keep moving forward. I finally reached a glowing 24-hour gas station. I pushed the glass door open, hoping to sit inside by the heating vent. The cashier immediately shook his head. I asked if I could stay inside for just 10 minutes to recover from the freezing temperature. He demanded I buy something or leave. Having no wallet and no cash, I was forced back out into the biting wind. Walking back toward the sidewalk, I spotted a middle-aged man walking his golden retriever. I approached him, wrapping my arms tightly around my chest, and asked if I could borrow his cell phone to make an emergency call. He handed me the device. I dialed the number of my husband, Seth. The line rang 3 times before going straight to voicemail. I tried again. The call disconnected immediately. He was actively declining my calls. I returned the phone to the stranger, muttered a brief thank you, and continued down the dark street. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my own smartphone. The battery icon blinked at barely 5%. The screen lit up with a new notification. It was a text message from a local law firm. I opened it. The message was from an attorney identifying himself as the legal representative for Seth. The text read, "You are hereby formally notified that you are prohibited from returning to the property. Any attempt to access the residence will be treated as criminal trespassing under Texas law. Law enforcement will be dispatched immediately." I stared at the glowing screen. Panic began to override the extreme physical pain in my chest. I needed a hotel room. I needed shelter. I opened my banking application. The loading circle spun endlessly due to the weak cellular connection. When the dashboard finally loaded, my eyes locked onto the numbers. The joint savings account, which held the entirety of my life savings from my years working as an IT auditor, displayed a 0 balance. I clicked on the transaction history. As a financial professional, I immediately recognized the routing structures. A series of massive wire transfers had been executed over the past 48 hours, moving funds into external holding accounts. The money was completely gone. I navigated back to the main menu. A bold red banner stretched across the top of the screen. Account closed. I tried to access my backup credit card. The system returned an error code indicating the card was permanently deactivated. The cruel financial shock hit my nervous system like a physical strike. I stood under a flickering streetlight processing the magnitude of the betrayal. This was not a spontaneous outburst of anger. Seth and my mother-in-law Pamela had orchestrated this eviction with absolute precision. They had deliberately waited until my congenital heart defect flared up. They waited until the doctor ordered me to take an extended medical leave. While I was lying in a hospital bed just days ago, they were busy draining our accounts, severing my access to funds and consulting attorneys. They stripped away my financial independence to ensure I had absolutely zero resources to fight back. My phone vibrated one last time before the screen went completely black. The battery was dead. I was cut off from the rest of the world. The realization triggered a massive surge of adrenaline, but my weakened heart could not handle the sudden stress. The dull ache in my chest rapidly transformed into an agonizing, crushing weight. It felt as if a concrete block had been dropped directly onto my sternum. The pain shot down my left arm and radiated up into my jaw. I clutched the fabric of my coat, gasping desperately for oxygen, but my lungs refused to expand. My heartbeat became a chaotic, erratic flutter against my ribs. I stumbled forward, trying to reach a nearby bus stop bench, but my legs gave out completely. My knees hit the freezing pavement hard. I tried to push myself up, all strength drained from my muscles. The yellow glow of the streetlights spun in violent circles. The sound of the howling wind faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. I collapsed entirely onto the icy sidewalk, and the world dissolved into absolute darkness. 2 days after losing all consciousness, I opened my eyes to the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital room. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor echoed in the sterile space. I tried to sit up, but a sharp ache grounded me against the mattress. A hospital social worker stepped through the doorway holding a thick plastic clipboard. She pulled a chair to the side of my bed and adjusted her glasses. Her tone remained strictly professional as she delivered the news. She informed me that my emergency treatment stabilized my heart condition, but my medical insurance policy showed a recent cancellation status. Therefore, the administration could not authorize further inpatient care. She handed me a printed brochure and stated that a transport van would take me to a downtown homeless shelter within the hour. Panic surged through my chest, but before I could respond, a shadow fell across the threshold. An old man, Walter, walked into the room. He wore a faded corduroy jacket and carried a worn leather briefcase. He ignored the social worker's questioning glance and approached the foot of my bed. Reaching into his coat pocket, he pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it directly to her. It was a hospital billing receipt. The document proved he had just paid my entire emergency room invoice in cash. The social worker reviewed the stamped paper, nodded silently, and left the room to process the discharge paperwork. I stared at the stranger, completely bewildered. I asked him why he would spend his money on someone he found collapsed on a freezing sidewalk. Walter pulled up the chair the social worker had vacated. He looked at me with sharp, calculating eyes and immediately clarified his intentions. He explicitly stated he was not offering charity or pity. Instead, he proposed a practical transaction. He managed a small rundown boarding house on the outskirts of the city with a vacant room. In exchange for free room and board, he needed a specific service. Over the past decade, he had accumulated mountains of disorganized paperwork, legal notices, and financial records. He lacked the energy to sort through the chaos. He needed someone to categorize every single document. Having no other options to avoid the shelter, I accepted his deal. Later that afternoon, Walter drove me to his property. He guided me to a modest room on the first floor. It contained a simple bed, a desk, and a small heater. It provided absolute safety from the brutal winter outside. The next morning, I began the work. He led me to a large storage room packed floor to ceiling with heavy cardboard boxes. Dust coated every surface. I rolled up my sleeves and approached the task with the strict discipline of my former profession. Using my experience as an IT auditor, I established a clear categorization system. I separated personal correspondence utility bills, banking statements, and legal drafts into distinct piles. For a week, I worked in complete silence, focusing entirely on the physical task to prevent my mind from wandering back to the betrayal. I processed hundreds of crumpled receipts and faded invoices. I created chronological timelines and indexed the files into labeled folders. Walter provided meals and checked on my progress, clearly surprised by the speed and accuracy of my work. The routine brought a strange sense of stability to my fractured life. On the 8th day, I pulled a severely damaged box from the bottom of a stack. The cardboard ripped as I opened the flaps, revealing a thick stack of official county documents. I began sorting them by date. I picked up a stiff yellowed piece of paper. It was an official property tax statement from Travis County. I scanned the printed text to log the details into my ledger. The registered owner's name listed on the document was Walter. My eyes moved down to the property location. My hand froze mid-air. My breath hitched in my throat. I read the street numbers, the road name, and the zip code 3 times to ensure I was not hallucinating. The address printed on the tax statement matched the exact location of the house I had just been evicted from. 3 weeks passed in rare tranquility. I reached the deepest corner of the storage room, shifting aside heavy stacks of old legal encyclopedias and tax ledgers. Behind a loose wooden panel near the floorboards, my fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled out a sealed tin box hidden beneath a thick layer of dust. I pried the rusted lid open. Inside the container lay a collection of tarnished military medals, an engraved pocket watch, and a small stack of faded family photographs. I sifted through the pictures, carefully stopping abruptly at a Polaroid taken on a familiar front porch. The image showed a teenage boy smiling brightly, resting his arm casually across Walter's shoulders. The teenager had the exact same sharp jawline and calculating eyes that I had looked at across a dining table for years. It was Seth, my husband. I traced the outline of the boy's face with my thumb, feeling a cold wave of realization wash over me. My mind raced rapidly as I processed the undeniable visual evidence in my hands. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at the Polaroid until the edges of the image blurred. If Seth was the teenager in this photograph standing affectionately with Walter on the porch of the exact house I was evicted from, the family connection became terrifyingly clear. Walter was Pamela's biological father. The man who had saved me from freezing to death on the concrete pavement was the biological grandfather of the man who had callously thrown me out into the street. I grabbed the photograph and marched down the narrow wooden staircase. Walter sat in the living room, meticulously repairing a broken desk lamp. I walked straight to his workbench and placed the faded image flat on the wooden surface. Walter stopped his work immediately. He set his tools down slowly and stared at the Polaroid. He did not act surprised, nor did he attempt to deny the reality of the situation. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. He let out a long, ragged sigh and leaned back in his chair. He wiped his grease-stained hands on a rag, preparing to revisit a painful past. Looking directly at me, Walter finally began to untangle the tragic origin of the deception. 15 years ago, Walter suffered the devastating loss of his eldest son in a fatal vehicle collision. The sudden death shattered his emotional stability completely. He fell into a deep, paralyzing depression, shutting himself away from the outside world. During that period of extreme vulnerability, his daughter Pamela stepped in. She visited him daily, offering to handle his complex financial obligations and medical appointments so he could mourn in peace. She presented herself as a devoted, loving caretaker to a grieving father. One afternoon, she brought a notary public to the house and placed a thick stack of documents on his desk. She assured him they were standard medical proxy forms and temporary financial management agreements. Exhausted and blinded by grief, Walter signed the papers without reviewing the fine print. He had unknowingly executed a broad, durable power of attorney, granting Pamela absolute legal authority over his entire estate, his banking portfolios, and his physical property assets. Pamela wasted no time executing her master plan. Armed with the legally binding power of attorney, she immediately transferred the deed of the family home directly into her own name. She liquidated his retirement accounts and moved the funds into external trusts. When the legal restructuring was fully complete, she arrived at the house with private security personnel. She stood on the same front porch where the Polaroid was taken and ordered the guards to physically remove her own father from the premises without allowing him to pack a single bag of his belongings. To prevent Walter from seeking legal recourse or contacting authorities, Pamela preemptively contacted their extended relatives and local law enforcement agencies. She fabricated a highly detailed medical narrative claiming Walter had developed severe dementia and aggressive paranoia following the tragic death of his son. She warned everyone that he might wander the city streets making wild accusations about stolen property. The malicious rumor worked flawlessly. When Walter attempted to report the fraud to the police, the investigating officers dismissed him as a confused, grieving senior citizen. He was permanently stripped of his home, his assets, and his credibility in a single, perfectly orchestrated strike. The first morning of the third month brought a sharp shift in our routine. Walter and I sat across the wooden workbench in his living room, surrounded by the physical evidence of our ruined lives. We extended our hands and firmly shook on a silent agreement. We officially ceased mourning our losses. We transformed our shared betrayal into a highly structured, aggressive legal campaign. I immediately repurposed a discarded desktop computer from the boarding house basement. Utilizing my extensive background as an IT auditor, I launched a comprehensive investigation into the digital footprint of Seth's financial history. I accessed historical banking portals and ran complex data extraction scripts to bypass standard user interfaces. I followed the routing numbers from the wire transfers that had drained my life savings. I traced the digital pathways through a network of obscure offshore holding accounts and domestic shell corporations registered in Delaware. I matched the origin IP addresses with corporate tax identification numbers. I cross-referenced the transaction dates with public business registry filings. The resulting financial map was undeniable. The digital ledger clearly proved that the initial seed capital for Seth's lucrative cybersecurity startup did not originate from legitimate angel investors. It consisted entirely of the funds Pamela had liquidated from Walter's retirement portfolios, merged directly with the savings Seth had stolen from me. While I dismantled their digital security, Walter handled the physical paper trail. He drove to the Travis County Land Records Office every single morning. He submitted formal requests for archived property deeds, historical tax assessments, and chain of title transfer logs. He paid the county clerks to produce officially stamped and notarized copies of every relevant file. He spent hours scrolling through microfiche records and cross-referencing parcel identification numbers. He successfully extracted certified copies of a series of highly irregular real estate transactions. The documents showed that Pamela had executed the transfers of the family home with abnormal speed immediately after filing the proxy forms. Furthermore, the county logs proved she had intentionally undervalued the estate's appraisal to avoid triggering automatic IRS audit flags during the property transition. We recognized that gathering the data was only the first step. We needed indisputable expert validation. We pooled the very last of Walter's emergency cash reserves and contracted an independent forensic accounting and document examination firm. We handed over the original power of attorney document that Pamela had manipulated Walter into signing 15 years ago. The forensic specialists subjected the paper to rigorous microscopic analysis. They examined the ink distribution, the baseline alignment, and the pressure points of the pen strokes. 2 weeks later, the firm delivered a legally binding affidavit. The official report concluded that Walter's signature exhibited severe biometric distress markers, lacking the natural fluidity of his standard handwriting. The experts testified on paper that the signature was definitively obtained under intense psychological duress and physical exhaustion, rendering the entire power of attorney legally fraudulent and invalid. Armed with the expert forensic affidavit, my detailed digital financial map, and Walter's certified land registry logs, we secured a meeting with a seasoned federal litigation attorney. He spent 3 hours reviewing our meticulously organized portfolio. He verified the chain of evidence and immediately accepted our case on contingency. He drafted a multi-count civil complaint, citing egregious fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of assets, and elder abuse, seeking maximum punitive damages and total asset restitution. To ensure our targets remained completely blind to the impending strike, our attorney executed a tactical maneuver. He physically walked the paperwork into the United States District Court. He filed the comprehensive civil lawsuit under a sealed docket. This specific legal classification prevented any automated public record indexing systems from generating alerts. Seth and Pamela regularly monitored their corporate legal standing, but our sealed filing bypassed their monitoring software entirely. We had successfully positioned a massive legal assault right at their doorstep without setting off a single alarm. Exactly 4 days before the extravagant engagement event, I sat in a secluded booth at a downtown coffee shop. I compiled the final procedural checklist for our legal team on my laptop. The ambient noise of the cafe broke when the wall-mounted television switched to a breaking financial broadcast. I looked up at the screen. Seth dominated the live feed. He sat in a high-rise studio, wearing a custom-tailored suit exuding the calculated confidence of a seasoned tech executive. The financial journalist sitting across from him listed the recent valuation spikes of his cybersecurity startup. When asked about his impending marriage and current trajectory, Seth leaned forward and smiled directly into the camera lens. He delivered a rehearsed, arrogant soundbite stating clearly, "My life has never been better right now." He credited his success entirely to his own intellect and relentless work ethic, boldly erasing the people he destroyed to build his empire. The broadcast immediately transitioned into a comprehensive segment covering the upcoming high society celebration. The network formally introduced his fiancée as Kayla, the daughter of a highly influential billionaire venture capitalist based in Texas. Financial news outlets began publishing real-time articles analyzing the corporate implications of the union. The media framed the marriage as a highly strategic merger. The reporters predicted the alliance would grant Seth exclusive access to elite global investment funds and political connections. He was aggressively utilizing Kayla's pristine family lineage to legitimize his fraudulent corporate empire. In the accompanying press photographs, Pamela positioned herself prominently beside the couple. She displayed expensive designer clothing and heavy jewelry, firmly cementing her fabricated status within the upper echelons of local high society. She smiled for the cameras, fully embracing the stolen luxury. My immediate instinct dictated aggressive action. I picked up my phone and dialed our lead federal litigation attorney. I requested the immediate execution of the court-approved injunction to shut down the offensive media campaign. The attorney firmly rejected the proposal. He instructed us to maintain complete radio silence. He broke down the precise mechanics of his tactical delay. Seth was currently liquidating vast amounts of his accessible corporate capital. He needed to finance a staggeringly expensive engagement gala to match the expectations of Kayla's billionaire relatives. Our lawyer explained that launching the legal strike prematurely would freeze those funds inside Seth's accounts, essentially protecting his money. By waiting, we allowed him to willingly hemorrhage hundreds of thousands of dollars on non-refundable luxury venue rentals, premium event coordinators, and extravagant catering contracts. Let him spend every stolen cent on an illusion, the lawyer advised. We strictly adhered to the council's directive and maintained our holding pattern. Seth's unchecked arrogance rapidly became his greatest vulnerability. Every boastful press release he authorized tightened the parameters of the trap. Every luxury invoice he signed depleted his operational cash flow. We monitored the public announcements from elite vendors confirming their involvement in the event. He was systematically draining his reserves to fund a singular night of absolute vanity. He constructed a massive, highly visible public pedestal. He failed to realize that the higher he elevated his public profile, the more devastating the inevitable impact would become. We watched him transform his stolen wealth into a highly publicized spectacle, ensuring the maximum number of witnesses for his impending downfall. He was building his own execution block. Walter and I remained isolated at the boarding house, observing the escalating media frenzy from a safe, calculated distance. We sat at the wooden kitchen table reviewing the finalized execution timeline provided by the district court clerks. We experienced no emotional distress while watching Seth flaunt the prosperity he had stolen from us. We felt only a cold, mechanical anticipation. Seth genuinely believed he had secured absolute invincibility. He operated under the assumption that his newfound corporate influence permanently insulated him from consequence. He completely underestimated the silent, methodical machinery of the federal justice system. He assumed victory was already his. We knew with absolute, unwavering certainty that the exact moment he stepped onto the grand stage to claim his ultimate social triumph, the legal strike would initiate, instantly dismantling his entire fraudulent reality. Exactly 5 months after that fateful night, Seth stood under the massive crystal chandeliers of the largest luxury hotel in Austin. He held a flute of vintage champagne, smiling triumphantly beside Kayla, and looked out over a crowd of the city's corporate elite. Hundreds of venture capitalists, tech executives, and local politicians filled the grand ballroom applauding his toast. Pamela positioned herself near the front of the stage, wearing an expensive evening gown, completely absorbing the artificial glory of her son's manufactured success. The heavy oak doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly swung open, interrupting the applause. A court-appointed process server walked decisively through the entrance. A federal receiver accompanied by 2 uniformed court-marshals followed immediately behind him. The group bypassed the private security personnel at the reception desk and marched straight down the center aisle. The live string quartet stopped playing. The ambient chatter died down. The entire room fell into a confused, tense silence as the men approached the stage. The process server climbed the carpeted steps. He walked directly up to Seth and firmly pressed a thick legal folder against his chest. Seth fumbled in shock. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers and shattered violently against the marble floor. The server spoke in a loud, commanding voice that projected across the quiet hall. He officially served Seth with the civil complaint. He announced the immediate execution of a federal injunction. He clearly stated that all personal bank accounts, real estate holdings, and corporate stock portfolios tied to the cybersecurity startup were now officially frozen. The federal receiver then stepped forward. He presented the binding legal mandate that immediately stripped Seth of his executive control over the company, pending the comprehensive fraud investigation. Simultaneously, the smartphones of every financial journalist and industry reporter in the room vibrated. Our lead federal litigation attorney had perfectly synchronized a mass email distribution with the physical service of the lawsuit. He sent a detailed press release outlining the forged legal documents, the stolen seed capital, and the ongoing elder abuse litigation. Reporters immediately opened the digital files. They scanned the attached forensic accounting summaries. Whispers erupted across the ballroom. The words fraud and stolen assets rippled rapidly through the crowd of investors. Camera shutters clicked continuously, capturing the exact moment Seth's corporate facade fractured. Kayla stared at the sealed court documents in Seth's trembling hands. She listened to the escalating murmurs of the financial journalists, confirming the severe legal implications. She realized instantly that Seth had orchestrated this highly publicized union for one specific reason. He needed to hide his unstable, fraudulent empire behind her family's pristine reputation and immense wealth. Her expression hardened into cold disgust. She did not yell, and she did not ask him for an explanation. She simply reached for her left hand and slid the massive diamond engagement ring off her finger. She placed the ring onto the podium, turned her back on him, and signaled her parents. The billionaire family exited the venue with swift precision, instantly severing all personal and corporate ties to his collapsing operation. Pamela rushed forward, attempting to block Kayla's family from leaving, but the court marshals quickly stepped in her path, forcing her to retreat. She looked around the room, her face draining of color as she recognized the absolute destruction of her social standing. Following the departure of the primary investors, the remaining guests initiated a rapid, chaotic exodus. Corporate executives hurried toward the exits, desperate to distance their own names from the unfolding financial scandal. Board members of Seth's startup furiously dialed their legal counsel while walking out the doors. Waitstaff abandoned their serving stations, taking the trays of food and drinks back to the kitchen. Within 10 minutes, the massive ballroom emptied entirely. The deafening silence returned to the space. Seth and Pamela stood completely alone in the center of the stage. They were surrounded by abandoned tables, half-empty glasses, and discarded linen napkins. The court officials remained by the doors, securing the perimeter to ensure Seth complied with the receiver's initial asset inventory demands. He stared blankly at the diamond ring resting on the podium. His hands shook uncontrollably as he gripped the court summons. The opulent engagement gala had completely transformed into a desolate wasteland of their own making. 6 grueling months in federal court finally concluded. The presiding judge struck his gavel, delivering the definitive verdict. He systematically invalidated the forged power of attorney from 15 years ago. He explicitly cited the forensic evidence proving severe psychological duress. He completely voided every subsequent real estate transfer, dismantling the fraudulent chain of title. Absolute legal ownership of the estate officially reverted to Walter. Seth and Pamela faced the immediate execution of a court-ordered eviction. 2 federal marshals arrived at the property the next morning. They handed Seth the eviction notice and escorted them off the premises, allowing them to take only a single suitcase each. The court authorized the total seizure of their remaining depleted bank accounts to cover the mandated financial restitution to Walter. Stripped of all liquid assets and equity, Seth formally filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The Texas corporate community permanently blacklisted him. Major tech firms and venture capitalists publicly severed all ties, ensuring he would never secure an executive position or startup funding again. Pamela lost her fabricated social status entirely. She retreated into isolation while awaiting trial for her impending criminal elder abuse and fraud charges. They were permanently eradicated from the elite circles they had manipulated. Walter and I drove back to the property the following morning. We unlocked the front door and walked into the quiet foyer. The house felt entirely different without their oppressive presence. I walked directly into the main living room. I grabbed the heavy gray curtains Pamela had installed to block out the neighborhood and tore them down from the metal rods. Bright, natural sunlight flooded the space, instantly chasing away the lingering shadows of their greed. We spent the entire afternoon clearing out their pretentious furniture, throwing their discarded items into a rented dumpster in the driveway. We physically and symbolically reclaimed the house room by room. 2 weeks later, we sat across from our attorney in his downtown office. Walter carefully reviewed a thick stack of legally binding documents. He was officially establishing a comprehensive living trust to protect the restored assets. He signed the final page, placed the pen down, and slid the paperwork across the mahogany desk toward me. He explicitly designated me as his successor trustee. This specific legal maneuver granted me absolute authority to manage the entire estate, protecting it from any future external claims and securing my long-term future. I picked up the pen and signed my name on the acceptance line. I looked down at my steady hands. I was no longer the discarded, severely ill woman freezing on a winter sidewalk. My congenital heart condition had stabilized entirely under proper, consistent medical care. I had successfully reclaimed my dignity, rebuilt my financial security from the ground up, and most importantly, found a genuine family. The events of the past year forged three undeniable truths. First, financial independence is your ultimate shield. Never surrender total control of your personal assets to anyone regardless of your marital status or emotional connection. Second, the justice system operates methodically, but it possesses the absolute power to dismantle even the most elaborate fraudulent empires. The law will not tolerate deception, and greed ultimately builds its own execution block. Finally, true family is not defined strictly by bloodlines, genetics, or marriage certificates. True family is defined by the people who stand beside you during your darkest moments, offering a hand when the rest of the world throws you into the freezing cold. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Have you ever faced a massive betrayal and fought your way back to the top? I would love to hear your experiences and perspectives. Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. If this story resonated with you, do not forget to subscribe to Revenge Mode for more powerful stories.